The Emperor does not speak, and yet his silence is the loudest sound in the galaxy. It echoes through marble halls and war-torn voidships, through the prayers of billions and the thoughts of one man who once called him father. Robert Guilliman walks the broken corridors of a dream he helped build, and everywhere he looks he sees only ghosts. He was raised to believe in unity, in reason, in the perfect empire of mankind. Now he leads something else entirely, a rotting, unending war machine powered by faith in a corpse. And though he bows before the golden throne, though he calls the Emperor master of mankind before 100,000 witnesses, deep within him burns a question he cannot silence. What if the Emperor was wrong? If the weight of that question compels you, if you've ever wondered what truly hides behind Guilliman's loyalty, behind his mask of duty and divine obedience, then remain with me. Like this lightless empire, this story endures through those who remember. Subscribe, share, and listen closely, for this tale is not about rebellion. It is about faith, the kind that bleeds. When Guilliman awoke, the first thing he felt was not pain, but absence. The chamber around him hummed with the mechanical rhythm of life support engines, a symphony of whirring servitors and data slate monitors reciting the mathematics of resurrection. But beneath it all was a silence that tasted wrong. It was not the silence of peace, but of something vast and watchful holding its breath. The air itself trembled with reverence for a god he did not believe in. He opened his eyes and the world flooded in. A flood of light so bright it hurt. 1,000 lumen globes burning in a cathedral of steel. The figures that surrounded him were strangers, robed in parchment and machine, their faces replaced by gold masks etched with the sigils of faith. They murmured words that had not existed in his time. Ave Imperator, Deus in Machina, Master of all. Each syllable struck him like a blow. He tried to speak, but the words would not form. The fluid in his lungs hissed as the medici drained it away. The world spun, memory staggering between then and now. The great crusade, the light, the unity, the brotherhood, gone. His brothers, gone. His father, what had they said of him? They called him a god now, a god. The very thing he had forbidden, the heresy he had fought against with merciless precision, had become the law of the Imperium itself. He rose, unsteady, towering over those who knelt around him. His armor, his own, had been restored, gleaming cerulean and gold, polished to a holiness he did not recognize. The Ultramarine's insignia shone upon his chestplate, re-sanctified by priests who had never known the taste of war. He remembered the last thing he had seen before darkness. Fulgrim's blade, a serpent's smile, his own blood clouding in his vision. And now, 10,000 years had passed, 10,000 years of worship and rot. The chamber doors opened. A wind of incense and burnt oil swept in, thick with the scent of devotion. A custodian entered first, his armor radiant, his face calm in a way only immortality could afford. Behind him came others, priests, scribes, warriors, each bowing so low their foreheads touched the floor. And then, at the end of the procession, he saw her, Call, or rather what Call had become. More machine than man, more code than conscience. His voice emerged through layers of vox distortion. My Lord Primarch, welcome back to the Imperium of man. Guilliman stared at him. What Imperium? The words were hoarse, stripped of ceremony. The same as it ever was, Call said. An empire unbroken. An empire eternal. But Guilliman could see the lie in his posture. Hear it in the hesitation between syllables. He had seen eternal things before he had helped build one, and this was not it. This was not the golden vision his father had carved into the stars. This was a machine still running long after the purpose of its design had been forgotten. They led him through the fortress monastery, through halls lined with statues of saints and angels he did not know. Their faces bore halos of light, their names carved into marble like prayers. He passed a shrine where acolytes wept before a mural of the Emperor's ascension, a towering figure radiant, enthroned upon lightning. The artistry was magnificent, the devotion absolute, and yet to Guilliman it all felt obscene. He remembered his father as he truly was, mortal flesh, brilliant, terrible, and cold. He had never asked for worship. He had demanded comprehension, and yet here they knelt. Billions of them across worlds he had once governed by reason. They had replaced understanding with faith, and in doing so they had survived. It was this realization that struck hardest, not anger, but grief. The galaxy had not betrayed the Emperor's dream. It had outlived it. Later, when the priest withdrew and the chamber dimmed, Guilliman found himself alone before a viewing portal. The stars beyond looked different now, like wounds scattered across a corpse. Fleets drifted in formation around planets ringed with ash, and far off, he saw the faint ghostly shimmer of the Astronomican, the Emperor's light still burning. It pulsed faintly like a dying heartbeat. He pressed his gauntlet to the glass and his breath fogged the cold metal. "Father," he whispered, though the word felt strange on his tongue. "What have they done to you?" No answer came, only the slow rhythm of machines breathing for a god who could not. He turned away from the stars and looked instead to his own reflection in the glass. The eyes staring back were not the ones he remembered. There was still strength there, yes, still the calm authority of a Primarch, but beneath it something new. Doubt. Not of his duty, but of its meaning. The door behind him opened again. A voice spoke softly, female, measured. "My Lord Guilliman." It was a sister of silence, armored in black and bronze. She bowed low, then gestured toward the far end of the chamber. "They await you in the Strategium. The High Lords. They seek your guidance." He almost laughed. Guidance. They had guided themselves into worshipping a corpse, into mistaking survival for victory. Still he nodded. Duty had always been his refuge, the one constant that outlasted belief. As he walked toward the Strategium, his steps echoing in the silence, the words of the priest returned to him, looping endlessly in his mind. Ave Imperator, Have Deus. He wondered what his father would have said if he could hear them. He wondered if the Emperor would laugh or weep. At the doorway he paused. Beyond lay the Imperium reborn, a realm of endless devotion built upon the ruins of reason. He drew a slow breath and stepped forward, not as a son but as a regent walking into a mausoleum. The sky beyond the fortress flared with the distant light of war. The galaxy was burning, and Guilliman had returned to a faith he could not share, to serve a god who would never answer. And somewhere deep in his chest, that first whisper of rebellion stirred. Not the rebellion of hatred, but of truth. The Strategium was a cathedral disguised as a war room. Marble columns rose like petrified banners, their capitals carved with victories from an age when victory had still meant something. Hollow projections burned in the air, sectors rimmed in red, supply lines plotted like sutures across a patient too far gone to heal. The High Lord stood beneath that ghostly light with the stillness of statues, each carrying the weight of an institution that had forgotten how to be human. Guilliman could read the years in their faces, sleep rationed to minutes, lips chapped by incense, eyes cracked by the glare of a million failing lumen globes. Only the Adeptus Custodes looked untouched, gold amid ash, their halberds at ease in hands that had never known doubt. They bowed when he entered. Not as a son returns to a father's house, but as a tool is presented to a machine. Titles fell like beads from a rosary. Master of the Administratum, Ecclesiarch, Lord Commander Militant of the Astra Militarum, Paternoval Envoy of the Navis Nobilitae, representatives whose robes carried more parchment than cloth. Between them stood Trajan Valoris, Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, his gaze steady, his salute spare of theater. Guilliman returned it with the old precision. Some gestures outlast any century. "Lord Guilliman," the master of the Administratum began, his voice embroidered with protocol. "By the Emperor's grace you are restored to us. The Imperium stands ready to heed your wisdom." "The Imperium stands ready to drown me in paper," Guilliman said mildly. It was not mockery, only diagnosis. Valoris did not smile, but the stillness around his eyes softened by a fraction, as if some private relief had just been admitted. The Ecclesiarch bristled, incense smoke steaming from the braziers at his back. "The Imperium stands by faith," he said. "Faith has carried us through 10,000 years. Faith lit the Astronomican when reason failed." Guilliman's gaze moved to the hololithic map where the beacon's icon pulsed, a pale crown over Terra's sigil. He remembered his father's orders carved like iron through the councils of the Crusade. No gods, no superstition, only the human will made law. He remembered, too, the last time he had stared at that distant light, when it had been a marvel rather than a crutch. The memory tasted of iron and wine and dust. "Faith," he said, "is a bridge men build when the road is lost. Useful, until it collapses under the weight of what must cross." A murmur rippled, shock, offense, calculation. The pattern-oval envoy inclined his head with the tired dignity of one who has lived too long inside necessary lies. Without the Astronomican, our houses are blind. Without prayer, the navigators balk where charts fail. If faith is a bridge, Lord Regent, then it is the only one that holds. Call glided from the shadows, a procession of mechadendrites trailing glyphs of light. Bridges can be reinforced, he said through vox grills. We can improve what devotion supplies. We can make the Emperor's light run like a calculus rather than a hymn. Can you make him speak? Guilliman asked. Silence gathered like frost. Even the projectors seemed to hesitate in their whirring. The ecclesiarch's knuckles whitened on his staff. He speaks through miracle, he said. Through victory. Through the survival of his realm. Guilliman looked at the star fields, at the red rings tightening like nooses around 1,000 worlds. Then he has been very quiet. Valorous stepped forward, his voice level. My lord, the palace is ready to receive you. The Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes attends the throne at the appointed hour. If you wish to offer homage, Guilliman repeated, tasting the word. The last time he had stood beneath the golden throne, it had been as a general reports to a sovereign, a man to a man. He had bled for that ideal. He had killed for it. The thought of kneeling now before machinery and myth stirred something raw in him. He did not know if it was grief or fury. He dismissed the council on pretext of fatigue and walked alone through the upper colonnades, his footfalls hollow on stone worn thin by 10 millennia of penitent knees. Statues watched him from every alcove, saints in Baroque armor bearing relics polished by the faithful's tears. A servitor trundled past with a censer big as a cannon, its vox grill whispering syllables of a prayer someone else had programmed into its dead mouth. Incense clung to his lips like ash. At a balcony he paused. Terra's sky was a bruise. Storms massed over the manufactorum cliffs, lightning stitching the clouds in crooked sigils. The imperial aquila spread across the plaza below, tiles cracked and mended so often that repair had become design. Pilgrims filled the avenues in processions that seemed to have forgotten where they started. A girl who could not have seen 12 winters clasped a scrap of parchment to her breast and wept as if it had spoken her name. He had designed worlds where such tears would be shed only for joy. The memory of Ultramar burned him. A low-throated hum rose through the palace bones. The throne's pulse endlessly fed by lives never meant to last. He followed it downward through galleries that shed gold leaf as if they were molting, through vaults where the air tasted of copper and old rain. The halls narrowed. The light thinned. Custodians passed in pairs, their nods precise, their silence heavy with the kind of knowledge warriors do not burden others with. At the final gate, the world became machinery. Cables as thick as ship masts braided the ceiling, hissing coolant traced patterns like frost over adamantium ribs. The heat that met him was not temperature but pressure, the weight of a presence that was more function than being. The Sister of Silence from before waited beside the threshold, her helm tucked beneath one arm, her expression a kind of peace he envied. She inclined her head and withdrew. Guilliman crossed into the sanctum and the air changed. The golden throne loomed like a mountain built from the bones of suns. The figure upon it was a shape suggested more than seen, a geometry of light and ruin that the eye slid from in self-defense. Priests encircled the dais in concentric rings, their mouths moving in a harmony that had outlived language. The smell of promethium and sanctified oils braided with a sweetness that reminded him, absurdly, of orchards on Macraga in spring. Memory hurt more than wounds. He stood at the limit set for mortal feet. No words rose. No prayer could cross the distance between the man he had been and the god the Imperium had made. He tried duty instead, he reported. He gave numbers because numbers had once been the Emperor's consolation. Fleets reconstituted, chapters awakened, Scitarii cohorts pledged, Astra Militarum regiments broken and bound back into shape. He gave the ledger of survival like a penitent recites sins. Somewhere in the hum of engines and the drone of the choir, he thought he felt a movement, a shift in pressure, a tremor in the pulse that had nothing to do with coolant or coil. It might have been the machinery settling. It might have been nothing. It was enough to make him breathe a prayer he did not believe. Father, he said, and the chamber swallowed the word like a stone dropped into a well. The reply, if it came, was not sound. It was the absence of it, an eddy in the river of noise that lasted no longer than a heartbeat. A rumor of warmth touched the scar that Fulgrim had left. He could have imagined it. He would carry it anyway. When he turned to go, Valoris was there as if he had been grown from the wall itself. "My lord," the Captain General said softly, "how does he seem to you?" Guilliman looked past him, past the priests and the coils and the gold toward the door and the world beyond it. "Endless," he said. "And very far away." Valoris nodded once. "Then we will stand closer." Guilliman stepped back into the corridor and felt the weight of the galaxy fall upon his shoulders the way a cloak falls. A cut made long ago, fitted to him before he had learned to refuse it. The hum followed him. The incense followed him. The question followed him most of all. What if the Emperor had always intended to be unreachable, so that men would have to bridge the distance themselves? He did not know. He only knew that the bridge before him was made of bone and parchment and fire, and that he had returned to walk it. The days that followed were not days at all, but processions. Guilliman moved through the Imperium as one might drift through a dream, lucid enough to know he was awake, powerless to alter its logic. Every hour was marked by ceremony, every meeting by prayer, every decision by a ritual meant to sanctify what should have been simple thought. The empire that had once been a machine of reason now beat with the heart of religion, and its rhythm was madness disguised as order. He toured the upper hives of Terra first. What had once been the seat of governance was now a tomb. Millions crawled through corridors that had become pilgrimage routes, their hands pressed to walls slick with the oil of 10,000 previous supplicants. They prayed to the Emperor for mercy, though mercy had long been rationed. The administratum had built itself into a labyrinth of its own making, every hall lined with scribes who wrote by instinct more than knowledge, each believing their parchment was the spine of the Imperium. Guilliman watched them as one might watch ants rebuilding a hill already drowned. When he passed, they did not look up. They whispered blessings instead, their lips moving to prayers written centuries before they were born. He wanted to tell them to stop, to stand, to see, but the words curdled before they reached his tongue. He knew what would happen if he shattered their faith. Without belief, the edifice would collapse within days. The Imperium survived because it did not question itself. At the upper terraces of the palace, he met with the Lords Militant, the men and women who claimed to command the galaxy's endless war. They knelt before him, not in loyalty, but in awe. He saw the exhaustion etched into their faces, the brittle glaze of those who have survived too long on duty alone. They called him Lord Commander, Regent, Son of the Emperor. Each title tasted more hollow than the last. A hollow map of the Segmentum Solar dominated the strategium table, its projection flickering with battlefronts stretching from Terra to the edges of Ultima. Red markers pulsed where worlds burned. Blue ones glimmered faintly, signifying life, fragile, rare. Guilliman traced a gauntlet over the map, his eyes following the bleeding edge of the Imperium's light. "You call this survival?" he said softly. One general stepped forward, armor gleaming like tarnished silver. "Survival, my lord, is all that remains." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. They were the truest Guilliman had heard since his awakening. He wanted to argue, to remind them of conquest, of order, of the dream of unity that had once lit the stars. But the argument died as quickly as it formed. He could not speak of dreams to those who had inherited only ruin. He dismissed the council and stood alone before the hololithic stars. The glow painted his armor in false light, and for a heartbeat he imagined them as they had been, bright, whole, unbroken. He remembered his brothers then, the laughter of Horus before it soured, the stern calm of Dorn, the brilliance of Magnus before the fall. All gone. He was alone in a galaxy that had learned to worship the absence of what it had lost. That night he walked without escort through the outer levels of the hive. The air tasted of ash and ozone. The sky above was a bruise of clouded light, the stars long drowned by the smoke of endless manufactoria. Workers slept in stacked alcoves, their bodies wrapped in rags, their dreams filled with prayers they did not understand. Servitors shuffled through the streets like broken angels, their augmetic limbs whispering sermons as they scrubbed the filth from the floor. Every sound was devotion, every movement ritual. He paused beside a shrine built from scrap metal and discarded bullet casings. A single candle burned at its center, its flame trembling against the breath of the wind. A child knelt before it, head bowed, hands folded. She was whispering something, too soft to hear, too desperate to ignore. He crouched beside her, the weight of his armor sinking into the stone. To whom do you pray? She lifted her face, eyes wide and luminous with hope. To him, my lord. To the Emperor. He keeps us safe. Guilliman looked at the flame. Does he answer? The girl hesitated, confusion flickering in her gaze. He must. The priests say he does. He wanted to tell her the truth, that the Emperor had not spoken in 10,000 years, that the light she worshipped was not a voice but a machine bleeding itself dry. But he saw the tremor in her fingers, the hunger carved into her cheeks, the fragile thread of belief keeping her from despair, so he only nodded. Then keep praying, he said. But also stay alive. That is a kind of faith too. She smiled, and it was a small miracle. When he rose, the candle guttered and went out, smothered by a gust of wind. He left it unlit. At dawn, he returned to the palace, his armor streaked with soot, his mind heavy with the image of the child's eyes. In the grand hall, the ecclesiarch waited for him, surrounded by choirs of robed singers whose voices rose like waves against stone. You walk among the faithful, the priest said. You see how they revere you. You see how the Emperor's word endures through them. Guilliman's voice was low, almost kind. I see that they are starving. Their hunger is holy, the ecclesiarch replied. He turned away before he could say something that would break the fragile peace between them. The priest's words echoed after him, each one heavier than the last. Their hunger is holy. That was the Imperium now, a monument built from starvation and belief. And he, the son who had returned, was expected to bless the famine. He walked to the balcony overlooking the plaza, where dawn broke through the smog in pale, reluctant light. From there he could see the endless tide of humanity moving through the streets below, each one bearing the weight of a faith they did not choose. He wondered if his father had foreseen this, if the Emperor had known that his silence would birth a god, and that God would feed on his people's suffering. He wondered which was worse, that this was an accident, or that it was design. Days blurred into weeks, though Guilliman no longer measured time in hours but in burdens. Each council, each decree, each inspection revealed another corner of the rot, another truth too heavy to name. The Imperium had not endured 10,000 years. It had calcified into a monument of obedience, petrified by the fear of change. To live within it was to breathe dust and call it faith. On Mars he walked through the red cathedrals of the Mechanicus, where every prayer was a calculation and every circuit an act of worship. The air smelled of rust, oil, and sanctified ozone. Rows of Skitarii stood motionless beneath banners that proclaimed the machine god eternal. Tech priests bowed as he passed, their voices layered with Binharic hymns praising the Omnissiah's flesh reborn. They called him Archmagos Reclaimed, a title he had never asked for. Belisarius' call met him in the heart of the Forge Temple, a place of living machinery that pulsed like an organ. Tubes of molten promethium pulsed overhead, casting the room in a crimson glow. You see, my lord, Khal rasped, his voice half-synthesized, half-sentient. The Emperor's work endures. The divine equation continues. Flesh is frailty, data is forever. Guilliman regarded him for a long moment, the gold of his armor reflecting the forge light like fire contained. And yet you still build with blood, he said. Khal tilted his head, the servos in his neck whining softly. Blood is the price of progress. You of all beings should know that. The Primarch said nothing. The machines around them hummed with a rhythm that almost resembled breathing. Once Mars had been the crucible of innovation, where men and machine had worked toward the same dream, mastery over ignorance. Now it was a cathedral to fear, the fear of imperfection, the worship of function. Humanity had built gods out of its own limits. When he left the forge, the air of Mars bit cold against his exposed face. He looked up at the burning sky and saw the faint shimmer of orbital traffic. Endless shipments of ammunition, food, and bodies ferried toward Terra. The Imperium was eating itself, planet by planet, belief by belief, and all of it done in his name. He returned to the Macraga's honor, his flagship reborn from the relics of his legion's glory days. The corridors were sterile, bright, and humming with purpose, yet even here, faith crept through the cracks. Servitors whispered litanies as they cleaned, and battle sermons echoed faintly through the vox lines. The Ultramarines, his sons, his gene seed made flesh, saluted him with unwavering devotion. They were everything he had hoped for and nothing he could change. He watched them drill, their discipline flawless, their faith unbreakable. A sergeant knelt before him, eyes bright behind his helm. For the Emperor and for you, my lord, he said. Guilliman's reply was quiet. For humanity, he said. But he could see the flicker of confusion, even pain, in the soldier's face, as if the word humanity were a foreign tongue. That night, he stood in his private chamber, surrounded by relics from a past that no longer existed. A data slate projected his father's old edicts, words written in the age of reason. He read them aloud, his voice low but steady. We are not gods. We are men, and that is enough. The sentence hung in the air like an accusation. He wondered if the Emperor would still believe those words now. A soft chime broke his thoughts. The door opened without sound, revealing a figure he had not summoned, a custodian, unarmed, unflinching. Valoris again. You've seen the weight of what you command, the Captain General said. Tell me what you think of it. Guilliman turned to the viewport where the void burned with the light of distant wars. It is a machine that has forgotten why it was built, he said, and I'm expected to be the cog that keeps it turning. Valoris studied him, his expression unreadable beneath the gold of his helm. And will you? He hesitated. Duty is all that remains. To refuse it would be treason. To fulfill it is despair. The custodian inclined his head slightly. Then perhaps despair is the most honest form of faith left to us. When Valoris left, Guilliman lingered at the viewport, the reflection of the galaxy flickering across his armor like fading constellations. He thought of the child on Terra, the candle that had gone out, the priest who had called hunger holy. And he thought of his father, once human, now a god sustained by worship and machinery. Was this what he had wanted? Or was this the inevitable shape of every empire, no matter who built it? A transmission broke the silence, an astropathic pulse faint and strained. A message from Ultramar. It was simple, but it made him stand straighter, his expression hardening. The words were clear. Civil unrest within the 500 worlds. Citizens questioning Imperial doctrine. He stared at the words for a long moment, then closed the transmission. Of course they are, he murmured. Reason never truly dies. It only sleeps. He looked once more at the stars where fleets burned and faith bled into light. The Imperium was a body without a pulse, moving only because inertia refused to release it. And he was its ghost of reason, condemned to walk through its corpse. Whispering sense into madness, for a fleeting moment, he imagined destroying it, burning every shrine, breaking every chain, silencing every lie until truth screamed through the ruins. But he knew what that would cost. Humanity would not survive the truth, so he turned away, bearing the weight of the lie instead. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the viewport, a faint shimmer crossed the stars, the Astronomican flickering like a candle touched by wind. He felt it even here, like the ghost of a heartbeat. And though he told himself it was only the machinery of the throne, only the pulse of dying systems, some part of him could not help but wonder. Was the Emperor listening? Or was he weeping? Guilliman's arrival on the shrine world of Tarsus Magna was meant to be a formality. The ecclesiarchy had summoned him to witness the reconsecration of the Basilica Invictus, a cathedral the size of a city built atop the bones of 1,000 martyrs. Its towers reached into the stratosphere, its walls carved from the bedrock of mountains. From orbit, it resembled a sunburst carved into the planet's surface. Pilgrims came by the millions, some crawling, some carried, all certain that a single glance upon the Emperor's likeness might redeem a lifetime of failure. As the Primarch's flagship descended through the atmosphere, the Vox channels filled with hymns transmitted from the surface, choirs layered upon choirs until their voices became a single living ocean of sound. Guilliman closed his eyes against it. The faith of mankind had once been a comfort. Now it was a pressure, too vast, too desperate, too loud. When the ship's ramp lowered, the air that met him was thick with incense and the heat of bodies pressed together in reverence. The moment his armored foot touched the tarmac, the crowd fell to their knees as one. The sound was overwhelming, a living tide collapsing beneath its own devotion. He raised his hand, meaning to still them, but the gesture only deepened their worship. Someone shouted his name, and then 1,000 voices repeated it. Guilliman! Lord Guilliman! Son of the Emperor! The words became a chant, rhythmic and terrible. They called him savior, regent, saint. He felt the weight of every syllable press against his skin like chains. The ecclesiarch greeted him at the foot of the basilica steps, robes heavy with gold thread, his eyes glittering with triumph. The people rejoice at your coming, my lord, he said. They see in you the living proof of his eternal will. Guilliman looked past him to the cathedral's doors where statues of saints lined the entryway. At the center stood one figure larger than the rest, the Emperor, rendered not as a man but as light incarnate, his face a perfect mask of serenity. Guilliman's voice was quiet when he spoke. They see proof of survival, he said. That is not the same as will. The ecclesiarch smiled with practiced patience. Faith is the will of the Emperor made manifest, my lord. It is not our place to separate the two. The Primarch stepped into the shadow of the doors, his presence dimming even the radiance of the statues. Then perhaps it should be, he said, and entered. Inside, the basilica was a world unto itself. Vaults stretched higher than thunderclouds, their ceilings painted with visions of divine conquest. The murals showed the Emperor as a god of flame, his sons kneeling at his feet, their eyes closed in worship. Guilliman stopped before one panel, his own likeness haloed, kneeling beside Horus, Leman Russ, and Sanguinius. His painted face was serene, his hands clasped in prayer. He stared at it until the muscles in his jaw locked. False, he whispered. I never knelt. A voice behind him replied, soft but clear. All must kneel before truth, Lord Guilliman, even those who once stood beside it. He turned to find a priest, a woman, her face lined by years of service, her robes plain among the gilded finery of her peers. She held no staff, wore no symbols of rank, yet her eyes met his without fear. I am Sister Lyra, she said, keeper of this basilica. He regarded her for a moment, then gestured toward the mural. Is this your truth? It is their truth, she said, nodding toward the distant sound of the congregation. And perhaps that is enough. Enough? His voice hardened. You build worlds on stories that were never spoken, lives on lies no man alive remembers. Lyra's gaze did not waver. And yet those lies hold the stars together. Guilliman took a slow step closer, the floor trembling beneath his weight. You would rather preserve falsehood than confront the rot beneath it? The priest's smile was small, almost sorrowful. Truth does not feed the hungry. Truth does not calm the dying. Truth does not hold back the night. Faith does. You of all men should know this, my lord. You have seen what men do when they lose it. He looked away because she was right. He had seen the void where faith failed, the madness that followed when hope was devoured by reason. He had built empires of order and watched them crumble because men needed gods more than logic. Lyra stepped closer. Do you doubt him? Guilliman's eyes lifted to the murals again, to his father's painted face, eternally serene, eternally silent. I doubt the shape they've given him. The priest's voice softened. Then perhaps that doubt is the truest faith of all. For the first time in decades, Guilliman had no reply. Later, when the ceremony began, he stood before the congregation as they chanted in unison. The sound filled every inch of the cathedral, vibrating through the stone itself. He looked out across the sea of faces. So many lives bound by devotion, so many hearts beating to a rhythm older than reason. They were not evil, he realized. They were terrified, and faith was their only defense against a universe that had forgotten mercy. When the chant reached its crescendo, the ecclesiarch gestured for Guilliman to speak. The silence that followed was absolute. He looked upon them all, priests, pilgrims, soldiers, slaves, and felt the words rise like a tide inside him. Your faith is your strength, he said, voice ringing through the vaulted halls. But strength without understanding is only a weapon in the wrong hands. Remember that the Emperor was once a man. Remember that he built this Imperium with reason, not prayer. The words struck the crowd like thunder. Murmurs rippled through the pews. Some bowed deeper, others froze. The ecclesiarch's expression was carved from stone. Guilliman turned from the altar and walked into the light spilling through the open doors. Behind him the chants resumed, quieter now, uncertain. Yet among them he heard something else. A single voice, small but clear, repeating the phrase like a revelation. He was once a man. He did not look back. Outside, the wind carried the scent of incense and dust, and the sky above the basilica burned red with the reflection of unseen fires. He stood there for a long time, neither saint nor savior, listening to the sound of faith cracking, quietly, invisibly, like glass beneath its own weight. That night, Guilliman could not sleep. The world beneath his feet was still alive with hymns, their echo rising through the clouds like smoke. He stood upon the balcony of the basilica's guest spire, his armor discarded, the weight of it replaced by something heavier, memory. From here he could see the endless glow of pilgrim fires stretching across the horizon, millions of flames trembling in the dark. To any mortal eye it would have been a vision of devotion, a testament to mankind's unity and worship. To Guilliman, it looked like the galaxy's funeral pyre reflected in miniature. He thought of Lyra's words, "Truth does not feed the hungry," and wondered when survival had become holy. The stars above were cold, their light indifferent. Yet men had painted divinity upon their indifference to survive it. Was that madness or brilliance? He no longer knew. The logic that had once guided his every breath now felt inadequate in a universe this cruel. He could command fleets, move armies, rebuild worlds, but he could not give meaning to their suffering. Only faith could do that, and faith was something he could neither control nor destroy. A soft sound broke his reverie. The shuffle of robes, the faint hiss of sandaled feet against marble. He turned. Sister Lyra approached, her candle the only light in the darkness. "You did not attend the final rites," she said. "I have seen enough rituals for one lifetime," he replied. She came to stand beside him, her gaze following his to the pilgrim fires below. "You look upon them as if they are lost," she said. "They are," he murmured, "but not in the way they think. They kneel before a God who cannot hear them, offer prayers to a corpse wired into eternity. I wonder if they'd still kneel if they knew." Lyra's candle flickered in the wind, the flame bending but refusing to die. "They would," she said, "because what they kneel to is not him but themselves. They pray to survive their own fear." He turned toward her, surprised by the calm in her voice. "You admit this?" "I serve truth, not comfort," she said simply. "Faith is a mirror, Lord Guilliman. Some see God in it, some see themselves. The wise see both and tremble." He looked at her for a long time, and something in her words stirred an ache he had thought buried. "When I was young, my father told me that reason was the light that would banish all shadows. I believed him. I built an empire upon that belief. But perhaps the shadows were never the enemy. Perhaps they were the only place men could hide from the light long enough to dream." Lyra regarded him with quiet compassion. Perhaps that is why he allowed himself to be turned into a god, so his silence could be filled with their hope. Guilliman said nothing. The night deepened. Lightning crawled along the horizon, silent but vast, illuminating the towers of the basilica like a heartbeat. He thought of the Emperor, how he had once walked among men as flesh, how his mind had encompassed the galaxy yet still been haunted by it. What had he seen in mankind that made him choose silence over guidance? Did he foresee this, the worship, the madness, the endless fire? Or had he simply given up on words when words had failed to change them? The thunder reached them at last, distant and weary. Lyra set her candle upon the marble ledge and stepped back. "When you leave tomorrow," she said softly, "the people will remember what you said. Some will call it heresy. Others will call it truth. Both will burn for it. Be certain that is what you want." "I want them to remember that he was human," Guilliman said. "That he once breathed as they do. If that is heresy, then it is a holy one." Lyra smiled faintly. "Perhaps all holy things begin as heresy." She bowed and left him there, her candle guttering out behind her. He remained on the balcony until the wind died and the fires below dimmed to embers. The silence that followed was immense, a stillness so profound it felt alive. He closed his eyes and imagined the Emperor's voice filling it, imagined what he would say if he could speak now. But the silence remained. And within it, Guilliman felt something break. Not faith, not reason, but the fragile barrier between them. For the first time, he understood that belief was not the opposite of logic. It was what logic became when faced with the infinite. When dawn came, he descended the basilica steps without ceremony. The pilgrims had already gathered, kneeling as he passed, their faces streaked with ash and tears. None dared speak, but all reached out to touch the hem of his cloak as if contact alone could make them whole. He did not stop them. Perhaps it did. Perhaps that was the miracle, the small human one his father had forgotten to bless. At the base of the steps he paused and looked once more toward the horizon. A storm was rising there, black and vast, swallowing the sun. It would reach the city by nightfall, and when it did, the fires would be extinguished. For an instant, he envied the storm its simplicity. It destroyed without questions. He turned to his honor guard, their cerulean armor gleaming in the weak light. "We leave for Macraga," he said. "There is still work to be done." As the fleet ascended into orbit, the basilica shrank beneath them, its golden spires piercing the storm like broken spears. In the void beyond, the Astronomican pulsed a faint, flickering heartbeat against the black. He stared at it through the viewport, and for a moment it seemed to flicker in answer to his gaze. It was impossible, he told himself. The light had no will, no voice, no message, and yet the thought came unbidden, quiet as a whisper from within the depths of his mind. Even in silence I am seen. He turned away, unwilling to believe it. But the echo lingered, soft and insistent. Perhaps faith, like light, could not be unmade, only reflected, and perhaps, in some mirror far beyond reach, something was reflecting him back. The Macraga's honor cut through the void like a blade through memory. Outside its hull, the galaxy stretched infinite and unfeeling, a vast ocean of night where faith and reason drowned alike. Guilliman stood in the strategium, surrounded by the pale glow of tactical hololiths. The flickering light caught on the edges of his armor, turning gold into something spectral, as though he were less a man and more a ghost of the age that birthed him. He had once believed the galaxy could be measured, mapped, mastered. That logic was the great light by which men would walk unafraid. He had built Ultramar as proof of it, a realm of order, discipline, and clarity in a universe that recoiled from both. Now 10,000 years later, he saw that dream turned into legend. The 500 worlds still thrived, yes, but their perfection was hollow, their obedience brittle. They worshipped his name as the Imperium worshipped the throne. His design had become another scripture. He turned from the hololith to the viewport. The stars beyond flickered faintly through the distortion of the warp. The dream of reason, he murmured. The words were not a question, but a dirge. Your dream, my lord? The voice came from behind him, calm and resonant. Trijan Valoris had entered without sound, his armor reflecting the blue-white light of the room. Guilliman's gaze remained fixed on the void. My fathers, he said. He believed men could rise by reason. That knowledge would make gods unnecessary. Yet now, 10 millennia later, they bow to him as one. Tell me, Captain General, was his failure inevitable or ours? Valoris paused, considering. The silence stretched between them like a gulf. Perhaps neither, he said at last. Perhaps it was design. To lead men, one must first give them something to believe in, even if that belief consumes you. Guilliman turned, the faintest flicker of anger in his eyes. If this was design, then it is a cruel one. A father who damns his children for the sake of their faith, a god who feeds on the ignorance he sought to cure. Valoris inclined his head. A creator cannot control how creation interprets him. The Emperor may not have wanted worship, but humanity needed it. Without it, we would have fallen to the dark long ago. Guilliman stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. So we choose ignorance to survive? We trade reason for safety? Would you rather the alternative? Valoris asked quietly. Look around you, my lord. Even now, chaos gnaws at the edges of every world. The warp does not devour us because we believe. Faith is the armor of the soul. Guilliman's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. Armor cracks. Valoris did not answer. The Primarch turned back to the stars, his reflection in the glass fractured by the faint shimmer of warp light. I remember when my father still spoke, he said. He told me once that faith was a weapon of tyrants. He used it against his enemies, but never within his own walls. He wanted men to stand on their own, to think, to question. And they did, Valoris said, until it destroyed them. The words landed like hammer blows. Guilliman closed his eyes. The images rose unbidden, the burning skies of Istvan, the betrayal that tore brother from brother, the long twilight that followed. He remembered the last time he had spoken to Horus, the despair in his brother's eyes when he realized reason had failed to hold back the abyss. Perhaps Valoris was right. Perhaps thought itself had been their undoing. The hum of the warp grew louder, the ship shuddering as it cut through an unseen current. Guilliman steadied himself, his gauntlets gripping the railing. When I was entombed, he said, I dreamed. I dreamed of a world where reason triumphed. I saw cities of light, men free from superstition, the stars tamed by their own hands. And now I wake to find them worshipping dust. Valoris's voice softened. Dreams are fragile, my lord. But they are not meaningless, Guilliman studied him. Do you believe that? I believe in the Emperor, Valoris said. But not as they do. I do not see a god upon the throne. I see a man who bore the burden of divinity because no one else could. The Primarch looked away. Then you see him as I do. Valoris inclined his head in silent agreement. For a moment neither spoke. Only the steady hum of the ship filled the void. Then the vox crackled, breaking the stillness. "My lord," came the voice of a communications officer, strained and reverent. "We've received a transmission from Terra, a summons. The High Lords request your immediate presence." Guilliman exhaled slowly. Another council, another chorus of prayers masquerading as policy. Valoris smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But perhaps they call because they fear you will remind them that gods can still bleed." The words lingered as Guilliman left the strategium, his stride measured, his mind a storm. The corridors of the Macragge's honor stretched before him like arteries of light and steel. Every servitor he passed bowed its head. Every soldier turned eyes bright with devotion. They saw him as salvation incarnate. He saw himself as the reminder that salvation was never free. When he reached his quarters, he removed his gauntlets and stared at his bare hands. They were still scarred from Fulgrim's blade, the wound that had once ended him. The skin had healed, but the memory had not. He flexed his fingers, feeling the faint tremor beneath the strength. "You tried to build reason," he murmured to no one. "And they built religion from your silence." The ship shifted again, gravity warping for an instant as it passed through a warp current. The lights flickered. For a heartbeat, Guilliman saw something in the reflection of the glass, a figure vast and radiant, watching him from beyond the stars. He blinked, and it was gone. But the echo of it, of him, remained. And for the first time since waking, Guilliman felt the impossible stir of faith, not belief in divinity but in intent. Perhaps the Emperor had not failed. Perhaps he had chosen this silence as his final lesson, to teach his sons that even reason must sometimes learn to walk through shadow. Yet as that thought took shape, another rose with it, darker and far more dangerous. What if the Emperor's silence was not choice, but judgment? The summons from Terra was brief, the journey endless. The Macragge's honor carved its way through the warp like a relic through storm water, its Geller field flickering with pale, uneasy light. Guilliman stood alone in his sanctum most nights, watching the shifting shapes that coiled just beyond the glass. The warp was always alive, but now it seemed to pulse in rhythm with his thoughts, as though it too were listening. He wondered whether the Emperor's dreams bled into it still, echoes of a mind that had once tried to cage gods and ended by becoming one. When at last he arrived upon Terra, the skies were the same dull bruise he remembered. The storms had never left. They only changed their names. The palace loomed across the horizon, its towers half shadow, half monument. It was no longer merely a seat of rule. It was the spine of belief itself, the place where reality and devotion met and blurred. He passed through its gates with the same dread that one enters a tomb already carved with one's own name. The High Lords awaited him in the Sanctum Imperialis. The chamber was immense, lit by light filtered through gold and smoke. Statues of saints lined the walls, their eyes upturned, their hands forever frozen in benediction. Guilliman looked upon them and saw not worship but surrender. They rose when he entered. The ecclesiarch bowed low, his voice trembling with ceremonial reverence. "Lord Commander Guilliman, by the Emperor's grace, we welcome you once more to his holy seat. The Imperium stands in your shadow and in his light." Guilliman's gaze swept across them, the masters of mankind or what passed for such. He saw fear behind their eyes, the desperate gleam of those who ruled not from power but from belief in their own necessity. "You did not summon me for ceremony," he said. The master of the administratum cleared his throat. Reports of unrest spread through the Segmentum Pacificus. Certain governors, heretics, question your decrees. There are whispers that your reforms stray too close to apostasy. They speak of your dangerous words on Tarsus Magna. Guilliman felt the faintest smile touch his mouth. Then they heard correctly. A murmur rippled through the council. The ecclesiarch's knuckles whitened around his staff. "You speak as though doubt were virtue." "Doubt is memory," Guilliman said. "It reminds us that truth must be earned, not inherited." The ecclesiarch's eyes flashed. "You would lead humanity back into questioning the Emperor's divinity. You would have them forget the God who shields them from the warp's hunger." Guilliman stepped forward, his shadow spilling across the marble floor like a tide. He was never a god. He was a man who bore the weight of a god because no one else could. "You've mistaken his suffering for sanctity." The words hit the chamber like thunder. Some of the lords flinched, others paled. Valorous, standing silently near the door, watched with that steady, measured calm only the custodes possessed. The ecclesiarch lifted his chin. And yet he sits still upon the golden throne, his light burning in the Astronomican. What mortal endures 10,000 years? What man commands the warp itself? If he's not divine, then what is he? Guilliman's reply was soft, almost mournful. Alone. The silence that followed was absolute. The flames of the censers seemed to dim. The golden light above wavered. For a moment it was as though even the palace held its breath. Then the paternoval envoy spoke, voice low and hesitant. Perhaps both truths can coexist. The Emperor was man and more than man, flesh refined through purpose. The galaxy has no need for gods or logic alone. It needs hope, whatever shape it takes. Guilliman looked at him with the faintest trace of pity. Hope without thought is the first step toward change. The council dissolved soon after, voices raised in formal dismissal but trembling beneath their titles. Guilliman turned from them and walked out into the open corridors, his boots echoing through halls that had forgotten silence. The air reeked of incense and sanctity. He passed pilgrims prostrating themselves against the floor, their fingers bleeding from devotion. Everywhere he looked, humanity reached upward toward a god who no longer reached back. And still the light of the Astronomican burned, unquestioned, unchallenged. He found himself once more before the door of the throne room, drawn as if by gravity. The custodes at the entrance stepped aside without command. They knew better than to question where their regent walked. The vast chamber beyond was unchanged. The golden throne loomed like the heart of a dying star, its conduits spilling light and smoke in equal measure. The emperor's form was lost within the brilliance, the outline of a man rendered sacred by absence. Guilliman approached until the heat pressed against him like a tide. "Father," he said, "they worship you as a god. They've turned your silence into scripture." "And the words faltered. For the first time in centuries, Rabaut Guilliman, Lord Commander of the Imperium, son of the Emperor of mankind, could not find the language of command. He bowed his head. "I don't know if this is your will or my failure. I built with reason. You built with purpose, and both have crumbled. If you can hear me, tell me, was this what you wanted?" No voice answered. Only the hum of machinery, the endless consuming pulse of the throne. And yet, for an instant, brief as breath, he thought he felt it. A presence, not words, not sound, but a flicker of awareness that brushed against his mind like a hand through fog. Reason is the dream of men who fear the dark. The thought seemed to whisper, not from without, but from within, and faith is the fire they build to see by it. He lifted his head sharply, heart pounding. The light before him pulsed once, faint and slow. It could have been an illusion, a malfunction, a trick of exhaustion. But Guilliman stood rooted there for a long time, staring into the radiance. If that had been his father's voice, it had not been comfort. It had been a reminder. He turned and left the chamber. As the doors sealed behind him, the pulse of the throne steadied once more. The galaxy's god slept on, silent and eternal, and the sun walked away, carrying the echo of that thought like a brand. That reason and faith were never enemies, only reflections cast by the same unreachable light. There are silences in the galaxy that even the warp will not touch. Guilliman had learned to hear them. They existed in the pauses between prayers, in the stillness after the last hymn, in the hush that followed when the faithful realized no miracle was coming. He carried that silence with him as he left Terra once more, a weight heavier than armor. The Macraga's honor glided through the void, its engines whispering psalms written by the machine god, its crew moving with the measured grace of those who lived in the shadow of myth. He no longer dreamed when he slept. The visions that came to him were not his own. They began as flickers of light, like the afterimage of the Astronomican imprinted on the back of his mind. Then came the voices, distant, layered, endless. Not words exactly, but impressions, a chorus without language crying through eternity. He sometimes wondered if they were the echoes of the psychers feeding the throne, or the souls that had burned for it. He tried to silence them, but the more he resisted, the louder they became. One night the light shifted. He saw not stars but faces. Countless faces, human, alien, lost, drifting in the golden glare of the Astronomican. They were not screaming as he expected. They were singing. The sound was not one of despair, but of something vast and mournful, something like worship stripped of illusion. When he woke, his pulse thundered in his ears. The ship's chrono told him no time had passed. The dream lingered anyway. He stood before the viewport for a long time, staring at the faint shimmer of the Emperor's beacon. Its light was constant, unwavering, yet there was something different now, something almost imperceptible. A rhythm, a subtle thrum beneath the glare. It pulsed not as a machine, but as something alive. Valoris entered quietly, as he always did. The custodian's armor gleamed dimly under the starlight. "You haven't slept," he said. "Sleep is for those who can still dream," Guilliman replied. Valoris joined him by the viewport, his reflection steady beside the Primarch's. "You're troubled." "I've seen things," Guilliman said. "The Astronomican. It's changing. I can feel it. It hums in my thoughts like a distant engine. What if something within the throne is stirring?" The Captain General's voice was calm. "There are always murmurs, my lord. The psychers who feed the beacon often speak of visions. Some claim to see his face, others say they hear his will." Guilliman turned sharply. "And what do you believe?" Valoris hesitated, his eyes unreadable. "I believe that the Emperor is what he must be. For us, for humanity. If that requires mystery, then so be it." Guilliman's laugh was quiet, mirthless. "You speak like a priest." "Perhaps," Valoris said. "But perhaps priests have simply learned the language of survival." They stood together in silence, watching the light of the Astronomican pulse across the void. It was beautiful in its way, terrible, relentless, consuming beauty. Guilliman wondered if his father had ever imagined it would last this long, or if he had imagined it at all. Later, when he returned to his chamber, the dream returned before he could close his eyes. This time he was standing in the palace before the throne itself, but the hall was empty. No priests, no custodes, no light. The throne was cold and dark. A single figure sat upon it. Not a god, but a man. The Emperor looked as he had before the heresy, before the wounds, before the machinery. His face was calm, expressionless. But his eyes, those impossible eyes, met Guilliman's with a weight that hollowed him out. "You built well," the Emperor said. His voice was quiet, human. Guilliman's throat tightened. "You built better." A faint smile touched the Emperor's lips. "Did I?" Guilliman felt the ache rise within him. That impossible mix of reverence and resentment. "They worship you," he said. "They kill for you. The Imperium survives on faith in a corpse. Was that your plan?" The Emperor's gaze drifted past him, toward the endless dark. "It was never my plan, but it was always their destiny. Men need gods even when they destroy them." "Then why not speak?" Guilliman demanded. "Why not guide them?" "They would listen. They would obey." The Emperor's eyes returned to his. Would they? Or would they break beneath the truth? Guilliman stepped closer. "I can bear it. Tell me." But the Emperor only looked at him, and for a heartbeat the silence became infinite. Then he said, "You already know." The throne vanished. The light returned, blinding, pure and terrible. Guilliman woke with a gasp, his hands trembling, the echo of that voice still ringing in his mind. He was not sure if it had been a dream at all. He looked again toward the viewport. The Astronomican flared once, brighter than he had ever seen. Then slowly it dimmed. For the first time, Robot Guilliman felt fear, not for humanity, not for the Imperium, but for what might awaken when the light finally went out. The Astronomican did not dim again for many days, yet Guilliman could not shake the memory of that fading light. It haunted him in the rhythm of the ship's engines, in the murmur of the crew's prayers, in the subtle flicker of shadows cast by candles in the command sanctum. The Macraga's honor continued its course toward Ultramar. But the stars themselves seemed less certain now, flickering like exhausted sentinels keeping watch over an empire that no longer believed in dawn. He walked among his warriors, silent as he passed. Every ultramarine turned to salute, their devotion as perfect as ever. But he saw it now for what it was, a mirror of faith, not reason. Each salute, each prayer etched into ceramite, each whispered litany before battle was part of the same vast system of belief that had swallowed his father's empire whole. He had tried to resist it, to drag the Imperium back toward logic, but the weight of 10,000 years of worship was too great. Even his defiance had become ritual. He returned to his chamber and found the lights flickering, the air faintly trembling as though the ship itself drew breath. The vox beads along the wall crackled with whispers, machine code but too fragmented to decipher. Then through the static a voice emerged, not words but sound shaped like intention. a tone that made the air thrum in his bones. He froze. The sound grew until it seemed to come from everywhere, from the walls, from the hull, from within his own chest. He sank to one knee, not from reverence, but from the sheer weight of the presence pressing against him. His vision blurred, and in the distortion he saw the faint outline of light, gold and white as if reflected through shattered glass. "Father?" The word tore from him before he could stop it. The light pulsed once like a heartbeat answering his own. Then came the whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Do you still not see?" Guilliman's breath caught. "See what?" "That I never left." He staggered to his feet, eyes wide, searching the air for something that wasn't there. You speak?" The voice was not sound, but comprehension. It spoke in thought, in image, in the resonance of meaning itself. "I have always spoken. But you and your kind learned to worship the echo and not the source." Guilliman's mind reeled. Why me? Why now? The light flared, and for an instant he saw through it. The warp unfolding like an ocean of fire, every soul within it a spark drawn toward the same impossible center. "Because you still question," the voice said. "You are the son who never believed, and therefore the only one who can understand." He clenched his fists. "Understand what?" "That faith and reason are not enemies. They are the breath and the lungs. One cannot exist without the other." The light began to fade, but he reached for it, desperate. "Wait. If this is truly you, if this is the Emperor, tell me what you want from me." "I want you to do what I cannot," the voice replied. "I want you to remember that the Imperium is not mine. It is yours. It always was." And then the presence was gone. The light dimmed, leaving only the quiet hum of the ship, the faint scent of ozone, and the echo of that impossible voice. He stood motionless for a long time. The rational part of him, the architect, the general, the scholar, insisted it had been a hallucination, a side effect of psychic proximity to the Astronomican, or perhaps his own exhaustion. But deep beneath reason, in the place where belief had been buried long ago, something stirred. When dawn cycle came, he summoned Valoris. The custodian entered without question, as ever. "We change course," Guilliman said. "Destination?" "Nowhere," he answered. "Everywhere." Valoris regarded him quietly. "You've heard something." Guilliman nodded once. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I've finally gone mad." "Then it would be a useful madness," Valoris said. "It has already saved us once." The Primarch almost smiled. "Then let us see if it can save us again." Hours later, as the ship glided through the void, he stood alone at the viewport, watching the light of the Astronomican blaze across the dark. It pulsed again, steady and calm, like the beat of a heart the galaxy had forgotten. He thought of his father's words. "I never left." Perhaps it was truth. Perhaps only a delusion woven from grief and duty, but he found that for the first time since his resurrection, the weight on his chest had lightened. Outside, the stars shifted, their light bending around the warp's unseen tides. Somewhere far beyond human sight, the Astronomican flared once more, its golden beam cutting through the immaterial like a blade through fog, and though Guilliman could not hear it, a whisper threaded through the silence, reaching every world, every ship, every heart that still dared to hope. "He watches still." Guilliman turned from the viewport. His armor gleamed faintly in the light. "The Emperor in the dark," he said quietly. "Or perhaps mankind in his shadow." He did not pray. He did not kneel. He simply walked back into the command hall, to the maps, the wars, the endless duty, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the regent of the Imperium smiled, not in faith, nor in triumph, but in something far rarer: peace.